So it's all about the team comp, huh? What is a team comp? So a team comp or team composition is the series of units that compose your team, and each unit has a different job. And there are different types of team comps. There are tank heavy team comps, there are just damage heavy team comps, there's utility heavy. Basically, each team will have certain things, right? You're always going to have damage units because you do need to kill things to win the game. So no matter what damage type you're using, whether it be physical or magical, or if you're running tanks or like mages or whatever, or void tanks, mitigation tanks, general DPS classes that can take a hit, you're going to need damage. So you need damage dealers, you need units that can typically take a hit, and you also need other things. So let's go over all these things. This little mock fight here. So I'm going to break down this team comp as an example. Now this isn't the most optimal team. This is just a random team comp example from one of my most recent playthroughs. All right, so first of all, let's go over who's killing things, because that's one of the most important things when evaluating a team. Now, the reason why this is important is because you need to know who's going to be getting danced, and you also need to know who's going to be the tip of the spear stabbing into the enemy team. And that is very important. All right, so for damage units, we have Amber, we have Tamara, we have Anna, we have Alir.
I've got this.
Let's get Hortensia out of the way. And then as secondary damage, Chloe can sometimes kill, Ivy can sometimes kill, Jade can sometimes kill, Pandreo can sometimes kill. So we have primary damage, this front row here. So I have like a speedy paladin on Lyn, I have an Ike tank with lance power, I have a wolf knight on Levin sword with sword power, and then I have a wolf knight on sword power with Folkvanger. And then for secondary damage, we have units that can situationally kill or clean up damage. So if something has been hit by another thing, these can usually clean up the kill. So these are like lower investment builds because there's only so much SP, there's only so many good emblems, there's only so many resources to forge weapons with. So when you're forging weapons, like you can't just hand everyone an insane weapon. You can hand some things, some of the weapons. So generally speaking, 4 to 5 units as main carries is the rule I go by. And then for secondary units, I try to get them the best equipment I can given the resources I have, but usually they're going to fall behind in terms of XP or resources because there's only so much. There's only so many enemies to kill. There's only so many ingots, whatever, you know, iron, steel, silver to upgrade weapons with. There's only so much gold. There's a finite amount of resources. So you're better off dumping it into 4 to 5 primary killers and then having secondary killers. And there's different builds that work for these secondary units. And you can run units like Fagato, you can run like warriors with bows and axes to just deal like chip damage or maybe go for crits. You can have like Thoron pokers. There's all these different types of like support damage builds. All right, so there's my primary damage and secondary damage. And then the rest is mostly utility. Now this Hortensia, you could consider secondary damage. She does have L Thunder, but she's mostly going to be freezing and dealing chip damage. She's not going to be hitting very hard, and in some cases she'll be dealing 0 damage. But as she levels up, she'll be, you know, hitting a little bit harder. Now Hortensia specifically has low damage and is on bad tomes for a mage. Like she can't use A rank, and also she has kind of low build. But if you switch her to like mage or sage rather, she can deal decent damage and become like a staff utility, like Thoron Poker, which is a unit that uses Thoron with a hit engraving to consistently deal chip damage and set up kills for other units that do the same thing. Alright, so then we have utilities. So we have a Dancer, which just refreshes whatever I need. He also stat boosts once he gets to level 25. And he also AoE heals with Curious Dance and Quality Time. So he just refreshes people and heals. That's all he does. He can also Chain Guard. So he has 2 functions. It's like you can Chain Guard to enemy phase to protect something, or you can dance player phase to accelerate, you know, dance one of your hard carries so that you basically duplicate that in combat. And then of course we have Fram as Martial Master. She can punch things if you want to run a build for it, but In this case, she's a staff bot chain guarder that also has quality time and canter. So utility units are typically free, or what I like to think of as free, meaning that you have to dump minimal, if any, SP resources into them. Very, very rarely do you have to put forges on them, and they just exist on your team, perform a function, and help your team. But we'll go over all the utility units now. Let me pulse back. All right, so we outlined the damage. Now the damage is only half the thing. There's other things too. Let's go over all the utility units. So these are my utilities. It's actually half my team. All these units back here. I'm gonna move these units forward so you can kind of see them visually. All right, so all of these are utilities. All of these staff units. Now, a staff unit, by virtue of existing, adds utility to your team because at any point in time, it can obstruct, it can heal, it can restore. Every staff unit has at least rank C, and some have even higher. So depending on the staff unit, they can also warp. But every staff unit can obstruct, restore, and heal, which can be useful because if you have a unit that gets frozen, a unit that gets silenced, you can pull that off of them with restore. You can have a bunch of utility spam obstruct to funnel enemies into a tank. There's all these different things that you can do just by having staff access. So you can see that this Ivy has just like Physic and 2 point blank heals. This Chloe has obstruct and heal. This Hort just has heal and restore. And then he just has heal. He has a bunch of heals. He should have obstruct. And then Fram actually has warp obstruct. Now you can put rescue on certain ones, which is very nice. So if you have rescue staff, you should put it on like Ivy or Hortensia. And you can run things like Fortify if you want, or better heals like Recover. But this is very deliberate where I'm running like Pandreo Sage so that he can, you know, go for doubling as he speed takes. So if he last hits something, he'll start gaining speed and then he can start doubling and contributing as he'll start like pushing himself into being able to double in one round while also being a staff bot. So that's pretty useful. And of course I can upgrade his bulk over time once I get more silver, because most of these other builds are pretty much finished. But these like support builds and damage support tend to get their upgrades later after your main team gets all the things they need, because then you can focus your resources on your secondary damage dealers and then start to push them into like almost additional primary damage dealers, which is pretty nice. So that's the utility aspect. Now let's talk about the tanking aspect. So who can tank here? So with Lyn, you can Alacrity, which is when you attack, you double. Now in this case, he's not doubling this, but he could double this before it counterattacks. Actually kind of surprised that's fast. Really, that's 23 speed, 23 speed axe enemy. All right, so usually your Lyn unit, oh, he could get speed +5. I could unlock that right now, actually. That would get him to doubling that. But he can kind of tank by the Alacrity, which allows him to initiate. So like usually if you attack something, you take counterattack damage unless you break it or you're out of range of the enemy's weapon. And in the case of Lyn units, if they one round before the enemy counterattacks, this allows them to initiate for free without needing healing. So that's in a way tanking, but this Amber build, he tanks like 1 to 2 things before dying, maybe 3. So he's what I would consider like an off tank, or maybe even just like a damage dealer who can take a hit. So like an off tank could tank maybe 3 to 4 enemies. He might be able to do that situationally, but it's not something you should count on really. This Tamara is a main tank. Now this is a unit that can tank a ton of things. She has base high defense. I don't think I use stat boosters on her either. So like if I wanted to, I could give her more defense and res. And she has pure water for tanking mages better. But if she engages with Ike, then attacks this, she'll take 10, and she'll basically take very little from everything else. So this is like a unit that you can send in the middle of 5+ enemies on the regular and just have them tank it. So that's a main tank. And then we also have a bonded shield setup if I want it, where I can send Anna in. She can like attack something. And then Alir has A support with Anna. So when Alir stands next to Anna, he gets increased avoid, and that can bonded. Now this requires 2 units, but this type of tanking pattern can be insanely broken and can completely route maps on its own. So just by doing this, I can basically guarantee I beat the map. But these are like my 2 tank things. Like I have a Temera tank and I have a bonded tank. Now, if you want to play fast, you might not need tanks as much, because as long as you position well and put your damage units out of range of getting killed. So like, for example, if I go here, I'm probably dead. Now, if I engage on Ike and go here, maybe I survive because I take half damage. But if I were to attack like very aggressively and I go there and there's no protection, bonded shield, chain guards, or anything preventing these enemies from just dumping damage on this unit, the unit's gonna die. So like when you're playing super aggressively, you'd want to attack like from here or something. So you're in woods, you're hitting them from woods, only 3 things can hit you, and we're assuming you're killing this. And you could probably set up a kill on this, then only 1 thing hits you. So there's different ways of playing, obviously. And of course, Canter enables you to ignore tanking. So if you have a bunch of high damage fast units or damage, like high crit chance units with Canter, you can run in, kill a bunch of dudes, Canter out. So if so like look at the difference between death and life. This is Canter. So if I kill something here and I go back to here, now I just have to tank 3 things. Canter is usually enough to get out of danger. And especially if you kill something here and go back, I just tank 2 things. And I can easily kill this. So if you have a bunch of Canter units, you can kind of like attack an enemy position more freely, because then you can get out a little bit more. Now if you have Canter plus, you go in danger and you Canter back 3. It's pretty crazy. Like you can get right out and you're totally fine. So it depends on your playstyle, depends on how you want to approach things. But if you run a bunch of fast units that double 1 round or crit, you can run Canter on those units, and then you can get out of jail for free and not even need to tank necessarily. Now, obviously, tanking can be good if you don't plan on warp skipping endgame maps, because the endgame maps have tons of enemy reinforcements, and the best way to kill enemy reinforcements is like bonded shield or some kind of main tank. And there are other tanks too. There's like dodge tanks. Dodge tanks are a little bit less reliable because the variance in enemy hit rates drastically changes what will attack you. So if the enemy cannot hit you, they won't attack you. So if you can hit 120 avoid, this axe enemy will never attack that unit. So the problem here is that everything has different hit rates. So like this is 148, this is 160. So if I want to consistently dodge this archer, this will never hit me. And that's the real problem with dodge tanking, is it's very selective and random. And also you have to watch out for mystics who ignore avoid terrain bonuses. So there's kind of, it's not as safe as like bonded shield, chain guard, or just like face tanking, where you just have like a unit, you just pump your defense resources into them, give them Ike, send them in. So like something like this. Like this is definitely much safer. You are taking damage, but once she gets below 75, she gets resolve, and she takes -7 more damage. So let's kind of demo that, I guess. I could warp her too. Let's see, or maybe not. Just pass. Let's just see what they do. They might go for Anna. Okay, they're going for Temera. Alright, she got seal res. They broke Anna. It's very unfortunate. And they're gonna shoot her now. See, the enemy knows what they're doing too. You have to watch out for things like that. Like they'll break your enemy phasers if you're not paying attention. Alright, so I did tank this. Alright, now that I have resolve, I also have my res lowered by 6. So that kind of hurts it. But with resolve, we can just add 6. Should be taking 9 damage. And obviously I could have switched to a javelin. Just 1 round of this. But you get the idea. You have your tanks, you have your damage units, you have your support damage, and you have your utility. And typically, the way I make a team is I think about who my 1 to 2, maybe 3 tanks are. And that can be, there's different builds that tank too. Like there's like Roy builds that tank. There's Erica builds that can tank. Obviously Ike builds can tank. I think there's even a Sigurd build that can tank fairly well. So there's a bunch of different builds that can tank well. And you want to think about who your tanks are if you need them. If you're doing like efficiency or LTC or something, you might not need main tanks. You might just want to figure out the positions and holds and like, you know, attacks that work to break down the map quickly. But if you're playing at like an average pace, I highly recommend having at least 1 or 2 tanks, even if it's like a bonded shield tank. Like, you don't have to use like some Ike tank if you don't want to. You could just run, you know, a high avoid. Now what I could do is I could Lucina engrave this, pull that engraving off of her, because sometimes I don't like to attack her because of Alir has, like, you know, slightly like similar avoid, to be honest, so like they might go for Alir. So I could pull that Lucina engraving off. But even just a bonded shield is pretty cracked for your main tanking. And there are other things too, like if you have like a Korin Mystic or a Korin Dragon unit, you can spam fire. Fire can delay all the ground enemies, so then in a way that's like tanking because you're just delaying all the enemies, so you don't even have to worry about getting hit. So you can actually forego tanking completely and just fire spam if you want. That's a thing to do. So tanking, and you also want to make sure you have your damage accounted for. So you want to make sure your damage units can kill, and you want to make sure they have like good forges, engraved forges, good passives. So right now Amber's in the process of getting Lance Power, so once he gets like Lance Power 3, he should one round pretty much everything he doubles, and once he gets speed +5, he'll be good. His build will basically be finished. And then long term, if I want, I could get him Lance Power 4 to 5 if there's enough SP books from tier 4 Welling after every single battle, because there's still quite a lot of paralogs this save file hasn't done. And then for Jade, I was trying to get her stats up. She's a little underleveled compared to the rest of the team. The problem with getting kills on a build like this is she probably has to start either going for crits, which I don't have resources to forge really, so I would forge this and give it like a crit engraving. She'd probably want to go for that, because if she went for Great Axing right now, she would want Ike to reduce damage, because when she attacks with a Great Axe, she's going to be getting doubled. So if it's not a physical enemy, it's going to be like a mage that one rounds her. I mean, it could be like an archer too, but she says I have a hard time killing with this build. And she's just the victim of there being too many other combat units. It's not that she's a bad unit. Like, she can pop off and be decent. I've had good Jades. But this is just like an example of like when you have too many units. Like, honestly, you don't even need as many units as the map gives you. You really just need like 8 units. You need like 4 to 5 combat carries. Maybe 1 or 2 of them can tank. And then the rest are just utilities, and that's your team. And your utilities can also be hybrids, but I usually do recommend running like a Martial Master, a Dancer, and then like some kind of like Sage or something, or even just like Ivy. Ivy's a good like flying Sage, basically. That's essentially what she is. Pandreo's nice though, because he is fast enough to double armors pretty consistently on Sage. But you could put him on Mage Knight if you want to go damage. I don't know that he can run anything else. Like, on High Priest, he is kind of fast, but his damage suffers. So if you want damage, you'll probably have to switch him into Sage and get him like speed +5. I'm trying out Speed Taker on him just to see how it goes. As long as I set up the kills, it should work. But generally speaking, I structure my teams around tanking and damage first, and then I always just use certain utilities. Dancer is always a good thing to use, and running the Solm sisters, or I'm sorry, the Illusia sisters, the Solm sisters, I just called Fagato a girl. The Solm sisters are really good utilities. If you don't even want to use them as main combat units, like just throw Bolg and Thoron on Ivy, hit engrave the Thoron, give Hortensia, you know, whatever, an Owl Thunder for chip damage, give her a bunch of staffs, she's good to go. Like, these builds are fine. Like, these builds, for like, they're not main units, they're like secondary staff bots. Give them Obstruct and a heal and restore, and they're good to go. Maybe some warps. So yeah, that's it for my team comp guide. Overall, I would say you want a tank, you want damage. You're gonna need damage no matter what you're doing. There's no team comp that can win without dealing a ton of damage. Now, the way you get damage is up to you. You can use Levin Sword, you know, Mage Knights, you can use crit builds, you can use great weapons. It doesn't really matter. As long as it's consistent and it works. And there are a lot of builds in this game that work, so like pretty much any weapon type can be made to be viable. There isn't really a weapon that's bad. The worst weapons typically are like bows and fists for general play. Like, bows are good at shooting down flyers, but outside of that, they can't enemy phase very well unless you like specifically go to like a certain range. So like this enemy mage, right? Like, let's say these are not here. I stick a bow unit right here. He can die of enemy phase. Cool. So they can enemy phase, but it just requires a little bit more attention to detail. Like positioning, it takes more time. But fists can't enemy phase very well at all because they're like a quad weapon, and those don't quad on enemy phase. So basically, you want, you know, daggers are really good, swords, lances, axes are really good, tomes are really good. These are like the best weapons for sure. And there's so many classes that make use of all of them. You have a lot of freedom as to what classes you can run and what builds you can run. So yeah, that's it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I do have a live stream that is Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern, where I stream different Fire Emblem games. Typically I do like a chat sabotage where chat gets to vote on certain things, like certain units, and then there's also like super chats so you can like kill off units and things like this, or force me to do something stupid because it's funny. So yeah, thanks for checking this out. Peace.